Most hardcore. Some of them talk, but lacking in character. How can I relax when it's theft of innocence? The harmless are broken. Oh, what tragedy to meet death with the lost word unspoken. Hide it behind the foundations. Charity constructed house of euthanasia. Architects of house of cards remain hidden behind one noble cause. Extravagant facade masquerading as God. I don't buy it at all. I like the real thing raw. I tell the whole veil off. The lights on or off. I get mine either way. The stellar man in effect. I'll leave you free and breathless like true psychedelic acceptance. Worldview becomes transcendent. This midnight smoke is so high octane, paralyzing the presence. Hello everyone and welcome to This Week in Tyranny, the most hardcore news show on earth. I am your host Conrad Rogas, welcoming you. Today is Saturday, November 25th, 2023, and this is episode 51. This is episode 51, and This Week in Tyranny is available on my website, truthandlaw.com, as well as the One Great Work Network.com. So a bit of a holiday edition, Thanksgiving edition, and it'll be a bit different, of course, in the holiday spirit. Now, on This Week in Tyranny, we usually travel by rail, right? We usually travel by ground, meaning I've been picking a topic, I've been talking about it, the different things that go into it, and we go into that topic, whatever it is, we talk about it completely, thoroughly, and we basically, from A to Z, talk about how it relates to life. We travel like a train does, by rail, A, B, C, D. Now, as opposed to that systematic type of exploration, in this episode we're going to be traveling by air. We're going to be flying. We're going to cover a lot of ground. You know, I often lament the news cycle of the recent weeks. I always talk about how there's not a lot going on, how it's just Israel, how it's just climate change. I've been talking about it being slow. Well, I got what I asked for, because this week is not going to be slow at all. It actually was very hectic. So I'm going to address all of it. Some of it briefly, most of it I'll address in a detailed way. And then I'll integrate all of it and show how all of it pertains to a single struggle. The core issue of life is going to be the core issue of this episode, and it's the struggle of the individual versus the collective. This is the whole story, and I will demonstrate that by talking about the number 51 finally at the end, since this is episode 51, and it's one of those episodes that I've been thinking about since I started doing this. You know, these kind of shows, I think about it. Episode 33, episode 51, episode 93, episode 144, if they let me get that far. This is one of those episodes, so I'm going to get right into it, and there's going to be a lot of journalism, there's going to be news coverage, there's going to be discussions of every area of life, and then there's going to be some study of numbers and letters and the fabric of reality. It's everything. Like I said, we're going to fly through it. First, let's get the elections out of the way. There are some elections. There are many elections that took place recently all around the world. And in the Netherlands, the anti-Islam populist Geert Wilders won a huge victory in the Dutch elections. Now, Geert Wilders, they're calling him the Dutch Trump. And what is he about? He says that Islam is not a religion, actually, but a fascist, militant imperialist doctrine, and thus he wants to throw out not only throw out the Muslim immigrants in the Netherlands, but also get rid of Islam in Holland in general. And other than that, he has some conventional conservative policies. You know, the lesser of two evils kinds. He's opposed to the European Union. We'll see what happens with that. He's for lower taxes, right, for supporting industry. So some of those good things that he stands for are the same kind of things that Donald Trump stood for. So the Donald Trump comparisons they draw with Wilders, they're actually pretty accurate. Now, I don't expect him to hold back tyranny in Europe in any significant way, nor do I see him bringing it on through militarization and nationalism, but it's possible. and time will tell, and it's something to keep an eye on. Herd Wilders, they're very similar to Trump. He's 6'5", tall guy, white blonde hair. I like the way he speaks though. I've heard one of his. He's very articulate, which is refreshing. But we'll see what happens. A safe bet would be that nothing much happens. Is that the agenda will progress as it has. Now the much more interesting election is in South America, because this week Javier Milei has been elected president of Argentina. Now, Mr. Milei, he describes himself as an anarcho-capitalist, meaning an anarchist and a capitalist. He has said that he wants to blow up the central bank, and he has called climate change a socialist hoax. So it's hard not to like a guy like that, right? And I am opposed to voting and opposed to representative government, but it's nice to hear someone speak the way he does and win. But what he will actually do as president, we will see. The most likely outcome is that he will be tamed, similar to the way Donald Trump was tamed. We saw that during the pandemic. He will be tamed. He'll focus on cursory issues, things that don't matter. He'll make a whole lot of noise, but not a whole lot of change. And that will go on until the next election. And then the advance of collectivism will pick up where it left off. That's the first outcome. The second most likely outcome is that he will actually radicalize Argentina and become a de facto dictator. And if that happens, the country will collapse. Its economy is already in bad shape. It'll collapse due to outside influence. And thus his ideas will be totally discredited. And the world will remember that. It will remember those ideas being exposed, and they will forever perceive freedom and individuality as being impractical and ineffective. It'll be, remember that guy in Argentina? He was saying that free market will solve the economy. He was saying that we don't need government to run society, and look what happened over there. That's the type of thing that is going to happen. That's the second outcome. Now, the third outcome, the least likely outcome, is that if and when he does see what goes on at the level of president, what is going on in his country and in the world, that he will tell the truth. That he will tell the truth, as he has told the truth so far about climate change and the central bank and all these things. Well, when he sees it, he will have the choice, and he may choose the option to tell the truth. Everybody always has that option. Now, I do not expect this to happen. I don't think so, and this is why we haven't seen really a true whistleblower politician. They'll have a moment here and there. Kennedy had a moment. Eisenhower had a moment. These presidents have a little bit of a moment where they'll try to speak up about something, but it doesn't last very long, and it's definitely not a full statement speaking of truth the way he speaks now. If you look at Javier Milei talk now, you can find it with English captions. The way he speaks, this is a guy who's telling the truth. So far he speaks 100% truth, and you can tell. But I don't expect this to go on much longer. But the most optimistic indicator that it does, like the sliver of hope, if you will, it's not really anything he has stated or done. It's what he's done when he was in school. And when he played soccer in school, he was a goalkeeper. He was a goalie, and I'm not joking about this. This is the thing. It's the most honest position in el fútbol. It's the goalie. In soccer, it's the goalie, because there's nowhere to hide. As a goalie, if you don't stop that ball, nobody's going to do it for you, and the team depends on you, and you alone have to go face the danger and meet the danger head on. Right? You alone can stop the shot, nobody else. Your attacking front, you have, 2 or 3 attackers. You have 3, 4, or 5 midfielders. Then you have 3 or 4 defenders, but only ever one goalkeeper. And that individuality is what breeds honesty and integrity. Whether he still has that in him, and whether or not he'll have it in him when the time comes, when the stakes are very serious, time will tell. We'll see. Now, let's go to the United States. What happened here on Monday night, November 20th? We had a mass shooting in Walmart in Ohio. Now, 20-year-old Benjamin Jones, he shot 4 people in a Walmart in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio. Now, a source has said that he was a neo-Nazi. He had swastikas. He was a Holocaust denier. They said that he, of course, far-right anti-government conspiracy theories, meaning he said that 9/11 was fake. Now, this characterization they were making of him, I was about to slam the New York Times for reporting it this way, because when you try to find out who the source is, nobody knows. There's no supporting information. It could be completely made up. Who is this source? But there does seem to be something to it, and a local news station reported court documents the News Center 7i team got hold of showed that the investigators removed 2 Nazi flags and a book on the history of the SS from Jones's home. So, in my view, that characterization of him is correct. I think it is likely that it is the case that he was a neo-Nazi and a racist. And that itself, is a perfectly logical alibi for somebody who commits violence, right? That kind of extremist ideology. But it's much more likely that there's another major angle here, and that angle here is the occult agenda, Ordo ab Chaos, which is order out of chaos. Now, as I go into this, let me be very clear. Violence is tyranny whether or not there's an organized plot to do this systematically. But there is a systematic plot. And when there's so much evidence for mass shooters being specifically trained, being monitored, being influenced to perpetrate these acts of violence for the benefit of a government or a supra-government ruling class agenda above the governments of the world, when that is the case, it has to be talked about, right? And for much of that evidence, I would recommend this book, Programmed to Kill, by David McGowan. I once again forgot to have it in front of me. I have the physical copy, but I make sure to display it. It's Programmed to Kill by David McGowan. The Politics of Serial Murder, I believe, is the subtitle. There's a lot of information there. So with that in mind, there are a few basic goals that the approaching totalitarian government wants to get done, wants to get accomplished, and mass shootings accomplish those goals. What are the goals? 1, take away the guns, remove firearm property rights, and turn the people against the idea of being armed, right? 2, to create support for a police state, a surveillance state, to have people call for more control and security in order to prevent these mass shooting events. That's 2. 3, to create a sense of fear and helplessness and discourage people from gathering together and to get them to not trust each other. A distrustful population is the only kind that will give up their individual rights to a collective. Only a fearful and distrustful population. That's 3. And 4, the goal is to mentally associate, in the eyes of the people, to mentally associate the idea of being anti-government or conspiracy-oriented with being a violent criminal. That's the 4th goal. And this accomplishes those goals, and that's why it's so important to consider, hey, who did this? Maybe somebody did this, right? And there are some red flags here, that this was not just a lone nut, but that he was put up to this on one level or another. The first is that he bought the gun. He bought the guns that he used to shoot these people. He bought them 2 days before the attack. Now, the reason that's a red flag is because if you're a neo-Nazi, if you're antisocial, violent, this kind of a person in America, you don't buy guns 2 days before the shooting. You have guns. You have them already. If you're a neo-Nazi, you've had guns for a long time now. So when I see that these guns are purchased right before a person goes to commit the crime, that makes me think that this was a coordinated thing, is that this person was put up to it. Because a person who thinks this way consistently and is just on a spiral downwards to commit the action, they would have acquired the firearms much earlier in their kind of deterioration into becoming a mass murderer. You know, that's the first red flag. The second red flag is that the family kept to themselves. Nobody really knows this guy in the area. They've only lived there for about a year and a half ago, and no one knew much about him. And their neighbor said this, and I heard him say this. You could view the video for yourself. They kept to themselves. Nobody really knows this guy. Apparently, the shooter, Benjamin Jones, is from Dayton. He's from the area, but then he moved out. He lived in Las Vegas for a while. And about that, you know, California and the West Coast desert area, that area over there, has a history of serial murder. That's in McGowan's book as well. It has a history of serial murder. It has a history of Satanism, as well as lots of military bases over there. And in the book Programmed to Kill, you'll see the involvement of the military and how it plays a huge role in the lives of these serial killers and mass killers in the history of this country in particular. That's your second red flag. Your third red flag is that he was arrested for DUI in October, 2 months ago. Now, what do I mean by this? I made a video in April about the mass shooting at the Covenant School in Tennessee. And in that video, I talked about triggers. And I talked about my findings that the shooter in that shooting, Audrey Hale, recently had 2 of her middle school basketball teammates die in the past year. And these are people who she was like obsessed with. They were very important to her. And they were her middle school teammates, and they die suddenly in car accidents, both of them, in separate car accidents, which is weird in itself. That happens, and then she goes to shoot up the elementary school that she attended. And I talked about that potentially being a trigger of past trauma. And the trigger is crucial if you are creating a mass shooter, because how else can you control him? How come all these people seem to fly under the radar their whole life, and one day they carry out their mission almost flawlessly? Like, we never hear about failed or foiled mass shooting plots in America. Nobody ever gets pulled over on the way to the location, or trips somewhere and the gun falls out of their bag and they get arrested. Right? They seem to always get to the location and prepare all the equipment, and everything goes right, and they carry out the act with almost military precision. How is that? Now, this one was not that. Benjamin Jones, he shot 4 people, none of them died. So who knows what really happened? But we hear on the news that it's gun rights and it's conspiracy research now that is creating these shooters, apparently. And therefore, to prevent these shootings, we need to give up our guns, and we need to stop doing independent research. That's the implication. And when I hear that, that's why I stress the controlled shooter angle, what has been called the Manchurian Candidate or MK Ultra mind control. And even if it doesn't apply to this particular case, the shooter backgrounds and methods are too similar and too consistent for me to not speak up about it, especially when there's all this evidence of it happening in the past, which there is. And the strongest evidence, albeit circumstantial, is how perfectly this fits the agenda of global slavery, of international socialism, and of total collectivism. Now, what's that agenda? Take the guns, create support for a police state, create fear and helplessness, and demonize the anti-statists. And that's what these mass shooters, they all do. Those are the effects. And you might say that a DUI arrest is not really a trigger or much of a traumatic event, but I would stress that an encounter like this makes it very possible, under the confusion and disorientation of having those red and blue lights. They're very intense. I don't know how often you guys get pulled over, but it has happened to me a lot. It happened to me recently. So that happens, and then a member of police says to him a certain phrase that has a key meaning, and in his mind sets off a chain of events that results in him carrying out this shooting. Members of police are often Masons, and Masons are often in inner circles, different fraternities like Satanism, or involved on some level with that kind of occult hierarchy. And in those inner circles, they would be noticed or taught skills like neuro-linguistic programming or suggestion. And thus they would be able to influence somebody through suggestion, which is like borderline hypnosis. And that will cause your mass shooter right there. And that's not to mention drugs or electronic devices. And if that sounds crazy to you, then I would tell you that that kind of psychological warfare is a part of the historical record and was used most notably by the police in East Germany in the 70s and 80s. Electronic weapons in the 70s and 80s. And it's called Zersetzung. This is a historical fact. Not even in Nazi Germany, after Nazi Germany. We're talking about 40 years ago this was going on. And it's publicly available, but people think it don't exist here. So, I'll leave that there about Benjamin Jones. Now, another thing that happened in the United States is that the Bin Laden letter to America resurfaced. The letter to America is Osama bin Laden's justification of his attacks on the United States after 9/11. It got pretty popular and then it was banned on TikTok, which is interesting. Because if Hitler and Stalin's speeches are on YouTube and available, then why not bin Laden's on TikTok? Just because it became popular and drew public outrage? You know, this sets a dangerous precedent. But that's not going to be my focus here. My focus once again with this story is order out of chaos. And I have noticed a sentiment out there that is pro-Palestine, yet is radical leftist. It's anti-capitalism and it's anti-America. And therefore it's sympathetic to bin Laden. It's one of the reasons this probably got banned is that there was a lot of support. People were saying, oh, he's right in what he's saying. There's a definite anti-America sentiment that's getting tied in with the anti-Israel sentiment. And I read this letter to America, and bin Laden, he made an argument that is alive and well today. And the argument is that since Americans vote for the leaders who are bombing countries in the Middle East, then they should be treated like military combatants. That the people, since they pay taxes and they support the military, then they're just like the military, and therefore 9/11 was justified to them. And I've heard that case made several times today, you know, in present day, that since the people in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank elected Hamas, then they are their supporters, and then therefore they can be held responsible for Hamas's actions, and they cannot. That's collectivism. That's holding an entire set of individuals responsible for something that individuals within that set did. And like mass shootings attack freedom and order, so does terrorism. You know, chaos and violence are enemies of freedom. And if chaos is the enemy, then the only solution is to respond with order, but forcefully. Forcefully respond with order, not to sit and pray, but to stand firmly and advance and do not allow violence to go on around us. Unfortunately, people believe that government and the military fights violence and terrorism because government and the military, they claim to be the force of order. Yet, the solution that's presented as order is a cage that will never go away, a cage that is being built around us. So that is the problem with that dynamic. Now, speaking of the Israel-Hamas war, this is day 51 of the Israel-Hamas war. And this week, the Israeli military arrested the Al-Shifa hospital director, the main hospital in the Gaza Strip that was getting bombed. And this is where it is now. When you look at this war, you see that we're at the point of arresting doctors and hospital directors. I'll leave that there. Now, on Thursday, a few days ago, reports came out that a bomb killed 27 people at a UN school. An Israeli bomb, of course. If that sounds familiar to you, it is. Because this is not the first UN school that Israel has bombed recently. And when the world starts to accept the notion of treating doctors like prisoners of war and accepting the idea of killing women and children, you are headed to tyranny no matter what happens, no matter who wins. And I just talked about collective punishment for the actions of individuals, and the entire situation in Palestine and Israel is a model of this. It's a live preview of the future. The future choice we have is we will live either in a completely fake, lifeless, technocratic Western world, like Israel, or we will live like the Palestinians in Gaza. These are the options being presented to us for the future. Now, unfortunately, many of the pro-Palestine voices are actually pro-communism. They're socialists. And that brings me to my next story, is that groups of pro-Palestinian protesters disrupted the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City. This was a big deal, and you could see they are clearly funded by the same kind of money as the George Soros money that was funding Black Lives Matter, because it's the identical same tactic, and I call it Trojan horse activism. And what they will do is they will say free Palestine, but then they talk about climate justice and zero carbon in the same breath. And Black Lives Matter did the same thing, talking about getting rid of the police, but at the same time talking about getting rid of capitalism, with one of their founders saying they are trained Marxists, they're well-versed and skilled in ideologies. They said that. And you see on this banner of the pro-Palestine protesters, it says Seven Circles Alliance is just one of them. And when you go to the website of the Seven Circles Alliance, you see it's literally a communist website with literal communist slogans. Alone we are weak, together we are strong. That's exactly collectivism. That's false. If you're weak alone, then you'll be strong, then you'll be weak together. If you are strong by yourself, then a group of individuals with you in it will be strong. The number of people doesn't magically change the quality of character contained within. That is done on a personal level. Another thing they talked about, I need to recall the exact phrasing. They talked about decentralizing private capital. Now, decentralizing sounds good. This is what we want to do with authority. We want to decentralize authority. We don't want a central authority. We want freedom. We want the power and decision-making ability to be decentralized. But when the Seven Circles Alliance says decentralize private capital, what they mean is take away private property. Because right now they see capital or money or property being centralized among the people that have it now. And they want to decentralize it from who has it and give it to the people who don't have it. And then you've got basically got communism. I mean, look at their symbols, look at their language. They're actual communists. So you've got actual communists now protesting against imperialism, but the Trojan horses, they've got an even bigger imperialism, which is collectivism, ready to get it through past the defenses. And you see this, they say, we are the climate problem, meaning people are the problem, meaning we are the problem. We need to be removed in order to help the climate. Not even carbon, it's about our way of life. And I said that last week, and you hear this from them directly. This is about the stifling, the crushing, the deterioration of human production and human expression. That's what this is about. And what is socialism? It's kind of what I just said. It's exactly the enemy of life itself. It's the collective devouring the individual. That's what you're seeing. Now, let's leave the United States and go to Dublin, Ireland, where in Dublin, 3 children were stabbed. 3 children and a woman were stabbed in a knife attack. 5 people total. People were stabbed, children and women. Now, not only did that happen, we had riots afterwards. So the news was really about the riots. And this was because it was allegedly, still is not certain, it was allegedly an Algerian immigrant, right, who stabbed a woman and 3 children near a Catholic school. So as soon as that news came out, groups of people gathered to protest and riot. Of course, with anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim sentiment, because the man was Algerian, so clearly we know what that means, right? The immigrants being brought over by the governments in Europe, tension is rising about that. So look at the perspective of the Irish people who protested here. They feel like life is slipping away. They have to work longer for less money. And what the media and politicians are saying on TV seems so detached, right? They're lying to them on TV. And at the same time, they see preferential treatment being given to immigrants, other groups, other fringe ideologies and causes. And when in that condition you see innocent women and children hurt, you're going to spring into action. Now, that outrage comes from a sense of justice, and the sense of justice is a prominent quality in any good man. Okay, so I think we need to remember that. But the tragedy is that a classic riot like this always resorts in more tyranny because, one, the people responsible for the actual injustice are not confronted. If the government is bringing violent people in, then the government should be confronted in a very serious and open way, not a nighttime outburst, not just some vandalism, throwing objects at some riot shields. A very serious confrontation. That's one. Two is that there's no clear or coherent expression of ideas. There's only action and emotion, no reason. And the problem is the people who then work in the military or they work in the police, in schools, and in public institutions, their way of life is also slipping. They also have to work longer for less money. But they think that they are on the right side, and they think that if they just hold on, that things will get better, since their intentions are good. And then they look at this rioting and looting, and they see that it results in a deterioration of order, and they're correct about that. But what they don't see, the police, even the teachers, people who support the status quo, what they don't see is that during the daytime, when the protesters get arrested or go home, they, the police, stay out there. And in daytime, they're the ones looting the citizens. By arresting them, by ticketing them, they are the ones setting the stores on fire. How? By imposing the mandates, the government controls, any new regulations, thereby shutting the businesses down. So there are many different kinds of looters and rioters in the world, and violent people. The tragedy is that almost everybody supports the looters, whether they're the kind that do their theft and violence at night or in the daytime. And revisiting the central theme of this episode, the individual versus the collective, who is right here and who is wrong in this scenario? Now, first of all, the only person responsible for this stabbing of those women and children is the person that actually did it. One person. Not whoever sold him the knife, not whoever brought him across the border. So with that in mind, the protesters who are trying to get justice done, they're actually the collectivists here. Because they're trying to hold an organization responsible, they're trying to hold a group responsible for the actions of one man. But, point number two, the individuals have a right to find that one man, to confront him, to hold him responsible. And look, if there's no transparency, then there's no justice. And the governments of the world work in a completely opposite way. Violent men, the way we do things, are dealt with in secret. And the people rarely ever see them. Then lawyers get involved, and then when lawyers get involved in court, it becomes something of market speculation. It's a kind of dynamic in which the defense and the prosecution, when they put somebody on trial, they're really disputing the commercial value of the person accused. And the judge is the arbitrator of that value. And when a person gets charged, they literally get charged like they get charged a cost that they have to pay. They get charged with the cost, and then when they're sent to a labor camp, which is prison. And even if the person does nothing at all in prison, like makes no money, does no work, it's still labor. Prison is a labor camp because what the convict pays with is opportunity cost, the price of potential. He pays with the price of what he could have been had he been free. And people don't realize the commercial side of our legal system, our justice system, so-called justice. Now, when that happens and he goes to the labor camp called prison, the real issues never get addressed. And there is no resolution, there is no justice. Whether that is the violent person's repentance and redemption. I am an example of someone who I used to steal, I used to commit crimes. Now that resulted in my repentance and redemption. Now, So whether it is repentance and redemption or the righteous and just removal of that person from this planet. Because sometimes a person does something and they just have to be removed because of the weight of their actions. So either one of those two options, that doesn't happen with our current system, and the individuals involved never see any justice. And for that reason, all of the police, the judges, the prosecutors, the guards, the bailiffs, and the courthouse janitors are all collectivists here. So then, in conclusion, if both the protesters and police are wrong, who is right? Who is correct in this issue? And who is correct is the man who says, hands off. Hands off the government right now and from this point forward. Leave the immigrants where they are. Don't send them back. I don't need you to send them back or do anything for me. I don't need you to protect me with your police, with your military. I don't need your pension. I don't need your retirement. I don't need your health insurance. I don't need your food regulations or building codes. And you will see that all of these societal structures and conventions will actually work much better with no government, but a free market, free exchange of resources, completely unregulated. So hands off, and I myself will deal with any violent people in society, and hands off of the guns, and then you'll see that there will not be much stabbing much longer. And that's when every woman has a weapon in her handbag and is empowered to use it, because then she wouldn't be afraid of the legal consequences of self-defense. And with government's hands off of our money, meaning no taxes, only one of the two parents would have to work. And they would have, even if they did want to work, they would have the resources to leave their children with somebody who cares about them, not today's public school or daycare. And therefore children would be much safer. And older children would be much more aware of their health and welfare, because growing up, we would know that the individual is responsible for everything that happens to them. And therefore, people would look out for the weak, the innocent, the fragile, because of the knowledge that no one else will do it for them. No institution will help them unless we do. And that's where independence comes from. It comes from a position of strength. A position of strength is where real help comes from in life. When you're falling and you're slipping on ice, the only person who ever helped you not fall is a person who was standing firmly on the ground. It is from the position of strength that help comes from, not weakness, not mutual weakness. And our society and our way of life is slipping because we are not individuals. We're weak, collectivists, and that's why our wives and daughters are getting killed. Now, I've mentioned women and children several times now, so that will conclude the news section of this show, and I'll get into the number 51 and why it's so important. So, the number 50 signifies law and principle. It's 50-50. It is equal action, reaction, and really that law, natural law and principle is the cause of beauty. That's what the number 50 means. And specifically, let's talk about the number 5, 50. 5 is the upward motion of the square. The square is 4. The symbol of the square is the structure of our physical reality. You know, we think of squareness as a human quality because man builds squares and nothing in nature was ever made square or in a straight line. So we think of humanity as something that creates the square. But the square actually is natural law. The laws of it, the structure and fabric of reality. It's cause and effect. It's if you pull on one corner, you'll get a reciprocal pull in the other corner, in the opposite corner. And when we say something is square, that means correct. It means right. Speaking of right, a square consists of all right angles. What is a right angle? It's 90 degrees. They're all the same. And square, the word square also means like rectitude. It means to rectify, to get square. To get square means to get even. It means to achieve justice. And justice is the natural law. So when we think about the number 4 and the square, that is kind of the base reality. That is Mother Nature, that, or more so even than Mother Nature, it is the law that creates Mother Nature and then all its children. Now that's 4. 5 is the upward motion of that. When you think of a square, and if you were to pull on the middle of it, pull it up, that's how you get the pentagon, and you get that 5 shape. Nature creates everything actually patterned after the number 5. So flowers have 5 petals, humans have 5 fingers, 5 toes, and 5 limbs. I know the head is not considered a limb, but consider it the way I just explained. Your arms and legs, those 4, they're your structure. They're your square, that they make it possible for you to exist and survive. They keep you rooted in the earth. Your arms and your legs are like the square. And then that makes it possible for you to live as a creature on earth. But we're not just creatures on earth. It is the upward motion and progress that defines us, and that is the mind. That is the head, which is the seat of intelligence. And that's why the symbol of the human being is 5. It is the pentagon. And the number 5 represents, man, but also represents the curve in general. The shape of a spiral, of the curve of beauty in the world is all having to do with the number 5. Now, the golden ratio of phi, 1.618, is observed in the shape of all plants and animals. It's everywhere. It's called the Fibonacci sequence, and it features the number 5. The Fibonacci sequence is the sum of the previous 2 numbers. So you have 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, right? And then it skips over 4 and goes to 5, and then you got 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55, which, by the way, is 2 5s. The number 5 represents things that are born or created or expressed. By the way, the letter E has to do with expression. E is the 5th letter, by the way. The Fibonacci sequence, the 5 is kind of a centerpiece of that. I'll explain how, this makes 5 a feminine number. Everything that is born comes from through the female, and creation itself is a feminine process. It comes from darkness, it comes from nothing, and then a result is born from that. The 5 also represents Venus, which archetypally represents the woman, the planet Venus. People say the Venus energy. The word Venus literally means like a bountiful, beautiful, curvaceous woman. And the planet Venus actually traces a 5-petaled flower shape in the sky, because every 8 years on Earth is equivalent to 13 years on Venus. And every 8 years, Venus in the sky, when it's traced, it completes this perfect pattern of 5 loops. And when you look at this image, any man, I can tell you, look at that image and tell you the implications and the desire contained in those shapes. And 5, 8, and 13 are numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. It's a 5-petal flower. Every 8 years on Earth is 13 years on Venus. And you got your 5, 8, 13. And actually, that pertains to beauty in not only women but men as well. Also, the perceived beauty of the face, how attractive we think a face is, whether it's male or female, it's based on how closely it approximates the golden section. And the golden section is just a geometric representation of the Fibonacci sequence. It's the same thing again. It's the Fibonacci spiral. It's those numbers: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Now, this is a code in nature. And the ideal man's body actually is pentagonal shaped. It is patterned after the 5 as well. Now, I'm sure you may have heard, it's been shown to be that the V-shaped figure is the kind that women find attractive in men, like wide shoulders and then slimming down in the middle. But it's not literally a V that
people find appealing, because a man should have a solid base, firm legs. So it's not literally a V, but a broad chest, yes, and this kind of slope, and that's exactly what a pentagon is. I mean, look at Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. It's the same idea. This is kind of the shape of the human being, right? This is the shape that we resonate with and are attracted to. And you may say, well, then why isn't the ideal shape of a woman pentagonal? What about the hourglass shape? Because, the hourglass shape is what everybody desires. But the ideal shape of a woman actually is two pentagons, one on top of the other, overlapping slightly. And that might seem exaggerated or simplistic, but I hope you can appreciate that this is actually how nature works, and the wonder of the simplicity of its intelligent design. So I say all that to say 5 is a number of beauty in the physical sense, joy in the emotional sense, and in the mental sense, 5 is also beauty. It's the symbol of sovereignty, and it's the symbol of the human being in general. And the human being is the freest creation in the known universe because of his free will. So now the number 50 describes love, because the foundation of love, like love between two people, and all kinds of love, the foundation is a 50-50 relationship, even. It's mutual respect, respecting the other person just as highly as you respect yourself. It's compassion and empathy, which is being able to feel and understand another person's experience as if it was your own. It's communication, which is reciprocal exchange of information, being able to communicate clearly and listen clearly. It's mutual adoration, which is admiring the other person, while they, of course, feel the same about you. It's all of those have to do with 50-50 relationships. And I don't know, guys, does that describe love well? I don't know. I'm single, so you guys got to tell me, like, if I'm onto something with this. But love is all about 50-50. That's the backbone of it. And 50-50 represents the laws of existence. That's cause and effect. That's physics, thermodynamics, mathematics, and morality. Comes down to every cause has its effect, and every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Anything you add to one side, you subtract from the other, or you add to one side, you add to the other. And every violation of rights, this is now in the moral sense, every violation of rights results in the surrendering of the violator's own rights. Violence takes away both of your rights to be unharmed, right? And that's 50-50. But 50 alone is not love, because just because something is even doesn't mean it's good. And the number 50 is kind of like the square. It's even and neutral, right? You can have something be in equilibrium but lifeless. So the number 50 itself isn't life and love, but it is principle. And now, principle is the backbone of love. But what makes principles turn into love? And the answer is upward motion. And that's the number 1. And that's why it's 51. Because 1 is the will. 1 is a straight line. It's shaped like a straight line. And the 1 is about movement towards a purpose. A single-minded drive and purpose. The number 1 is masculine. It's a straight line. It starts at a single point, and it gets to a given point in a single direction with no curvature of any kind. That's the woman's world. No curvature. Single-minded drive. And by the way, the word drive means straight line. Like when you drive down the street, or when you drive a stake into the ground, or you drive a nail into a board, or when you drive somewhere, you go parallel to the road. And the number 1 is a pillar. It's literally the erect phallus, guys. What's a more masculine symbol than that? And the upward motion is what makes the 4 turn into a 5. If you imagine a square and then like a post, a stake going through it, that's what would stretch it and create the pentagon. It uplifts the square into its exalted form, the pentagon. And that's the role of will, and ultimately how there is no love without will. And when people fall in love, the reason they do is because they can see the highest and best in the other person. And how they stay in love is the upward motion to realize that ideal. It's about movement, it's about a purpose. See, what love is wanting to be the best possible version of yourself so that you can give your partner the best gift you possibly can. And in return, you'll receive the best possible version of your partner in return. And that's what makes them both happy. We're not happy when we're lazy and stagnant. We're happy when we are capable and doing things. It's an exchange of value. An exchange is seemingly 50-50. The word exchange means even, seemingly, but it isn't. The exchange in love that keeps love going is actually 51-49. This is the highest form of love, is when both people are working towards their individual fulfillment and happiness, yet they're giving that extra 1% because you want the person to be happy and enjoy something just a tiny bit more than you yourself do. And of course, that person feels the same. And this is what it's all about. It creates a feedback loop where both you and your partner take turns being the giver and receiver of care, of attention, of adoration. And this is what makes love the most powerful force in the world, is perpetual imbalance. It's not just a voluntary exchange between two equals. It is that plus extra. See, it's a dance. It's a dance where one is always leading and one is always chasing. And stagnation is the end of love. And stagnation chemically and biologically is the end of life. It's the 1% extra effort that gives it life. And that's the will. That's the 1 in 51. It's the one person in the world that you'll make an exception for. You'll sacrifice nothing for nobody else, but you'll sacrifice for them. And that's the same concept applies to loving a principle or loving an idea. Like with the work that I do here, I love what I do. I love justice and liberty. And I wouldn't sacrifice my well-being for anyone's gain, for anyone's comfort, for anyone's security. But I'll sacrifice it for their freedom. And I'll sacrifice it for justice. And that's love. So that is the meaning of the number 51, as I see it. Now let's talk about some symbolism of those events I talked about, right? It's symbolism, it's synchronicity. The show, as I was putting it together, it got a little bit mystical, and this is just the way it goes. And of course, when I talk about the symbolism of these events that I talked about in this episode, I'm not saying that this was choreographed and arranged to fit the picture that I'm about to paint. But it's not that it proves that the dark occultists are doing all of this, step by step, and making the numbers add up and doing all of this symbolism. In fact, it's proof that that's not what's happening, because it would be impossible for them. The symbolism and synchronicity in this world is a signature and a kiss from the divine intelligence that created this universe and is experiencing this universe with us right now. Which means that's all the more reason to fight, to take this world back from the impotent cult and collective of cowards that has taken it over. So, first thing I saw, jump off the page, that Walmart shooting happened at 3360 Pentagon Boulevard in Beaver Creek, Ohio. Now, I talked about the Pentagon and how it represented sovereignty and the aspiration of man to become something greater than an animal, right? And this is on Pentagon Boulevard. Now, about 2 hours east of there, a family of 5 died in a Thanksgiving house fire in Athens County, Ohio. So 5 people. I happened to see it because it's on the same local news station website. So a family of 5 burned to death, but they died in a house fire on Rainbow Lake Road, which, by the way, is Route 89. By the way, Fibonacci, 89 is a Fibonacci number. It's the number after 55. By the way, that road connects to Route 33. And look, there's only one Route 33 in America, and that's it. And that's it right there. It connects to that Rainbow Lake Road. And in my 33rd video that I ever made, is actually the one where I talked about that Covenant shooting. And you can look that video up. I talked about the Covenant shooting and the significance of the number 33 then. So when I see Route 33 connecting to this road that the house burned down on, with a family of 5, I think about that. And I think about it being named Rainbow Lake Road. And I almost didn't talk about this until I saw the significance. There was an explosion at Rainbow Bridge. It was at the Canada border in Niagara Falls, New York, a few days ago. And a married couple actually crashed their car at the border crossing and died on impact. And it was actually at Rainbow Bridge. Now, the rainbow signifies expression and individuality, right? I know it means the LGBT flag now, but it really just means expression and individuality, right? But what the rainbow also represents historically, mythologically, is the archer's bow. Because the rainbow is a bow, and man is the arrow. And the purpose of man's life is what? Is the upward motion, to aspire, to grow, and to achieve. I just talked about the arrow. So that is the one, that is the will. So when you kill a married couple and crash the Rainbow Bridge, that's what it was called, the Rainbow Bridge. What are you doing? You're preventing the launch of the arrow. So when you have a family of 5 burn down on Rainbow Lake Road, again, you're preventing the upward motion. And this cannot be choreographed this way. It might be, but I doubt it. But it's telling you a story, right? There are stories written into existence. And when they crashed that car at that Rainbow Bridge, the car they crashed was a 2022 Bentley Flying Spur. What's a spur? That's the name of the car. Now, a spur is a torture device that you dig into horses to make them run faster. But that's beside the point. A spur is a spike or a sharp object, like an arrow. And to spur something means to motivate it, to spur something into action. And that's the same concept as the will. It's the same concept as the number 1. Speaking of which, that crash occurred on Wednesday, November 22nd, and that is the first day of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the zodiac sign that is the archer. Sagittarius is the archer shooting his bow upwards into the air. At the end of Sagittarius is the midpoint of winter, and it's the shortest day of the year, but Sagittarius is shooting his arrow upwards for the sun to return to its former glory. Now on the first day of Sagittarius, they crash at Rainbow Bridge. The Rainbow Bridge is the symbol of the archer's bow, with a car called a Flying Spur, the symbol of the archer's arrow. The bow and the arrow, right? And that's the same thing as the 5 and the 1. It is the masculine and the feminine, the divine masculine and feminine. That's why you see a married couple died in the crash, because the bow represents the woman and the arrow represents the man. Now, to do violent acts to sacred symbols, would that be a thing that Satanists do? You know, what's the most sacred symbol in the universe? Oh, I don't know. The female body, probably. And Satanists, they do rituals involving the naked female, sacrificing it, desecrating it. That's interesting, right? Now, what do collectivists do? They sacrifice the individual to the collective. And the most sacred thing in the universe is man, meaning the individual, man and woman. It's the most complex form of life, and it's the closest approximation of divine will and divine intelligence. And that's why the collectivists and dark occultists use the number 51, and that's why they desecrate it. Because our love and self-respect is their enemy. And the most obvious example of that is May 1st. May is the 5th month, so May 1st is 5/1. That's International Workers' Day, and that's when all the communist and socialist countries celebrate. And the symbolism is that the 5, the expression and sovereignty of the individual, collapses and becomes the 1, the collective. And that's how they use it. Now the other example is Area 51. a secret Air Force military base. That's actually called, the real name of it is called Homey Airport. Like Homey, Homey. And you can see it sits at the south of Groom Lake, which is shaped like a pentagon. The lake of Area 51 is shaped like a pentagon. And when you look at the runways, they themselves are shaped like a pentagon. I know that could be somewhat common for airports, but hey, this is what it is. And with the main runway running right through the middle of it, extending through the top in an upward motion, just like I talked about. Just like I talked about the one turning the square into a pentagon. Now, I hope you guys know I wrote that like before I got to this part. So, I didn't plan that. You could see the script unraveling, right? And it's called Homey Airport, just like home. And when you draw the outline of a home, what is it? You got your base, you got your parallel walls, and then you got your roof meeting at the top. It's a pentagon. The number 5 is a symbol of sovereignty, but also of the woman, as I've mentioned, which makes it the symbol of the home, because who nurtures sovereignty in this world? It's the wife and the mother. And they stay with the children where? At the home. Now, an Air Force base is the exact opposite of that, because it's not growth or sovereignty, it's repression, and it's patrolling the skies. It's not the arrow aiming for the heavens, it's the arrow flying around the perimeter, looking down at what other people do. That's what it's all about. And the main military building in America is what? The Pentagon. It's the Pentagon, and we have 50 states, each represented by a 5-pointed star. But look at the flag. The 50 stars are in a box, which means what? They're in a corner. They're dominated by the white and red. And that has a dual meaning. The flag of the United States, just like the number 51, it has a dual meaning. It could be sovereign states, standing alone as equals, held together by purity and passion, which is the white and red. Or the alternative meaning, it could be that the sovereignty of the states is trapped into a collective, held together by blood and surrender, which is also red and white. And the second is the reason they use the 5 and the Pentagon, and they use the 51. And what do they do at Area 51? What is that known for? UFOs, alien experimentation, energy beam technology. It doesn't matter what they actually do there. This is the symbolism of Area 51. This is the mystique. And primarily, the Area 51 is associated with aliens. And it's really a joke, because extraterrestrial life is irrelevant. Don't worry about aliens, because collectivism is creating the aliens. We are the aliens. We are the ones who, through the news and the internet and the social media and the schools, are living in a world that is not reality, a planet that's not Earth. Through genetically modified foods, through mRNA vaccines, through our dependence on electronics, we are changing who we are and what it means to be human. By turning away from intuitive parenting, taking the child away from the home, putting them into the schools and the daycares, we are losing our humanity. And now, when you look at how lonely everybody seems to be, how separated men and women are from each other, and therefore how separated they are from themselves, you start to see what we have become. The individual has become an alien on his home planet. Meanwhile, who uses the symbol of the star? The Soviets, the Communist Chinese, and Islam, which are what? The ideologies that demands the most from the individual. Those are the ones that demand the most compliance and submission to the collective. And why do they use the star? Because that's our symbol. We look at the stars, we look up at the stars in the sky, and what we don't realize is that the sky, like blue clear water, is a mirror. And that the stars are just a reflection of living human spirits. The living human spirit. And the airplane does symbolize the arrow, the will of man, and the act of flight is freedom. But unfortunately, the Air Force pilots up there, they don't fly for freedom or the will of man. To them up there, every light on the ground represents a potential threat, when every light on the ground is supposed to be a sovereign star. And their superiors and commander-in-chief, they talk about the end of fossil fuels. Meaning what? Meaning extinguishing the electricity down there. And that's what collectivist environmentalism will get us. There won't be any fuel burnt for the power to keep the lights on, unless it comes from a government-approved, government-controlled nuclear power plant or biomass or something like that. And the stars will slowly get put out, except in the megacities where everything will be controlled. And by the way, there is a way to have clean energy and to stop polluting the earth, but that's only if the inventors are free to invent, and only if the stars, if the stars are allowed to shine. It's like a kid who stumbles along trying to walk. He's going to knock some things over. He's going to get hurt. This is us right now with our current energy paradigm, with the hydrocarbons that we burn, with the fuel, with the oil, with the diesel. We're children trying to learn how to walk. And the collectivist wants to get us back down to our knees and to crawl. This is the evil of the agenda we're working against now. And if collectivism has its way, there will come a day where planes fly over darkness as humanity collapses, relinquishing its individual spirit. And then the only way to survive will be, one, in the city, working like a slave, spying on your neighbor, trying to stab the next man in the back by way of the authorities, and just living the life of a thief. And that's the way to survive under communism. You could just ask my relatives who did that, who have seen it. That's one. You could survive like that in the city, like a slave. Or two, you could live out in the country in the darkness like an animal. And I refuse such a choice. I'm going to carry the truth and law into the darkness and into the future. And I personally, individually, will not let the marriage of love and will die. Thank you for your presence. I will see you next week. On the 1-year anniversary of This Week in Tyranny, it will be episode 52. I'll see you next week on This Week in Tyranny.